Excuse me, this is a private moment. You're in the wrong place. Maya Rodriguez looked up from Marcus Sterling's grave, tears streaming down her face, a 4-year-old boy with piercing green eyes clinging to her waitress uniform. Catherine Sterling froze. Those eyes, she knew those eyes. The billionaire's hands trembled as she dropped her bouquet of white lilies. This child had her dead son's face, her grandson. The grandson she never knew existed. "Who are you?" Catherine whispered. Maya wiped her tears, stood up slowly, and for the first time in 3 years smiled. Not the broken smile of a grieving woman, but the calculated smile of someone who had been waiting exactly 1,247 days for this moment. Catherine Sterling had just walked into the most perfectly laid trap in corporate history. And Maya Rodriguez. She had been preparing for this confrontation since the day she buried the evidence that would destroy the Sterling Empire forever. The November rain turned Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx into a melancholy landscape of marble and shadow. Catherine Sterling stepped carefully between the headstones, her Italian leather shoes clicking against the wet concrete paths. At 55, the heir to Sterling Enterprises had never expected to find strangers at her son's grave. But there they were. A young black woman in a Bell's Diner uniform knelt before Marcus Sterling's polished granite headstone, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Beside her, a small boy with startling green eyes traced the carved letters with tiny fingers, whispering words Catherine couldn't hear. "Excuse me. This is a private moment. You're in the wrong place." Maya Rodriguez looked up, revealing a face marked by exhaustion and genuine grief. Her waitress uniform was soaked from the rain, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that spoke of long shifts and little time for vanity. But her eyes. There was something in her eyes that didn't match the simple story her appearance told. "I'm sorry," Maya said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I didn't know anyone was coming today." Catherine's gaze shifted to the child, and her world tilted. Those eyes. The same piercing green she saw every morning in her mirror. The same eyes that had looked up at her from Marcus's crib 28 years ago. The same eyes that had closed forever in a hospital room 3 years ago after the car accident that took her only son. "Who are you?" Catherine demanded, her business instincts overriding maternal shock. "And why are you crying at my son's grave?" The boy looked up at Catherine with those impossible, familiar eyes. "Mama Maya, who is the lady?" "Mama Maya." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. "My name is Maya Rodriguez," the young woman said, standing slowly and protectively moving closer to the child. "And this is Dylan. I work at Bell's Diner downtown. I come here every month because—" She hesitated, glancing at Dylan with obvious love. "Because Marcus was important to us." Catherine felt the world spin. Marcus had died 3 years ago at age 28, taking with him all her dreams for the Sterling family legacy. She had investigated every detail of his life after the funeral, desperate to find meaning in his loss. Private investigators had combed through his apartment, his computer, his phone records. She had never found evidence of serious relationships, let alone a child. "Important how?" Catherine asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The rain began to fall harder, but none of the three moved. Dylan tugged at Maya's uniform, and she picked him up automatically. The gesture so natural it spoke of years of practice. Maya looked directly into Catherine's eyes with a courage that surprised the billionaire. "Because Dylan is his son." The bouquet of white lilies slipped from Catherine's manicured fingers, scattering across the cold stone. 3 years. 3 years she had mourned Marcus's death, believing the Sterling bloodline had died with him. 3 years of watching her empire grow while her heart remained empty. 3 years to discover now that she had a grandson, a black grandson raised by a waitress, living a life she could never have imagined. But there was something in Maya's posture that didn't fit the simple story she was telling. A careful awareness, a hidden strength, as if she were measuring Catherine's every reaction and finding her wanting. Catherine's phone buzzed. David Chen, her personal assistant. She ignored it. "This is impossible," Catherine said, though even as she spoke she could see Marcus's features in Dylan's face, the stubborn set of his jaw, the way he tilted his head when listening. "Marcus would have told me." Maya's smile was sad but knowing. Would he? The question hung in the rain-soaked air like an accusation. Catherine's relationship with Marcus had been complicated. Business dinners instead of bedtime stories. Expensive gifts delivered by assistants instead of personal presence. Board meetings that took precedence over football games. "You don't understand," Catherine said, her voice taking on the tone that made corporate executives tremble. "I'm Catherine Sterling, Sterling Enterprises. I have resources, connections, the ability to provide for Dylan in ways you could never—" "Ma'am," Maya interrupted gently, "Dylan doesn't need your money. He needs love. And he has that." Catherine stared at this young woman who dared to interrupt her, who stood in a soaked waitress uniform and spoke about love as if it were more valuable than the sterling fortune. What Catherine didn't know was that Maya Rodriguez had been expecting this encounter for exactly 1,247 days. Every month when she brought Dylan to visit his father's grave, she had prepared for the moment when Catherine Sterling would finally appear. Every conversation she'd had with Dylan about his family had been carefully crafted. Every tear she'd shed at this graveside had been genuine, but they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of anticipation, because Maya Rodriguez wasn't just Dylan's guardian. She was a weapon that had been 3 years in the forging, and Catherine Sterling had just activated her. But what Catherine didn't realize was that this revelation was only the first thread in a web of secrets that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her family, her business, and her own son's death. What Maya didn't tell Catherine was that she had been expecting this confrontation for exactly 1,247 days, and every tear she shed was real, but they weren't just tears of grief. 2 weeks after the cemetery encounter, Catherine had transformed her private study in her Manhattan penthouse into a war room. Private investigator reports covered the antique mahogany desk that had belonged to her grandfather, each manila folder containing details about Maya Rodriguez's life that left Catherine increasingly disturbed. "Single mother, no known family except an aunt in Chicago," Catherine muttered, flipping through surveillance photos. "Works 60 hours a week at 2 jobs to support the child. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights that cost $1,800 a month, half her income." David Chen stood silently beside her chair, holding a tablet loaded with financial records. In his 15 years as Catherine's personal assistant, he had seen her destroy corporate empires with less emotion than she was showing now. "No formal education beyond high school," Catherine continued, her manicured finger tracing a credit report. "Student loan debt from—" "Wait." She stopped. "What's this? Night classes at Columbia?" David cleared his throat. "That's where it gets interesting, Mrs. Sterling. According to the registrar's office, Maya Rodriguez has been taking continuing education courses, paralegal certification, business law, corporate governance." Catherine's ice-blue eyes narrowed. "A waitress studying law?" "It appears so. She's maintained a 3.8 GPA while working full-time." The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, 40 stories above the street. Catherine had bought this apartment specifically for its view of Manhattan, a daily reminder of the empire she commanded. But today the view felt less like a symbol of power and more like a throne under siege. "What about Dylan's birth certificate?" Catherine asked. David opened a separate folder, his expression troubled. "Here's where it gets very interesting. We couldn't find a birth certificate listing Maya as the mother. In fact, we couldn't find any hospital records, insurance claims, or medical documentation about who gave birth to Dylan. It's as if his biological mother never existed in any official capacity." Catherine drummed her fingers on the desk, a habit her board members had learned to fear. It meant she was calculating, strategizing, preparing to move pieces on a chessboard only she could see. "Get me everything on Marcus's final year," she ordered. "Phone records, credit card statements, travel itineraries. If he had a relationship serious enough to produce a child, there will be evidence." David's tablet chimed with an incoming message. "Miss Sterling, you have a call from Richard Thornton at the law firm." Catherine picked up the secure line. "Richard, Catherine, we need to discuss the situation with the Rodriguez woman." Thornton's voice was unusually tense. "I've been asking around very discreetly about the potential for a custody challenge. And the legal landscape is complex. Courts heavily favor biological relationships, especially when the child has been in stable care for years. And there's the matter of your profile." Catherine's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean, my profile?" "Catherine, you're a high-powered CEO with a documented history of prioritizing business over family relationships. Any custody attorney worth their fee will paint you as an absent grandmother trying to buy a relationship you never earned. The words hit like slaps. Catherine had built Sterling Enterprises from a mid-sized manufacturing company into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. She had sacrificed everything for that success, including she was beginning to realize her relationship with Marcus. "Schedule a meeting with Maya Rodriguez," Catherine said, her voice taking on the edge that had intimidated senators and CEOs. "Tomorrow at 2. In my office." "Catherine, I'm not sure that's—" "Tomorrow at 2, Richard. I want to see what this waitress is really made of." After hanging up, Catherine walked to the window, looking down at the ant-like figures of people 40 floors below. Each one of them had dreams, aspirations, problems. But none of them had ever stood between Catherine Sterling and something she wanted. What Catherine didn't understand was that Maya Rodriguez had been preparing for this exact meeting since the day Marcus died. While Catherine had been building her empire, Maya had been studying every move Catherine made, every business deal, every public statement. She knew Catherine's strengths, her weaknesses, her pressure points, and Maya had discovered something during her research that would change everything Catherine thought she knew about her own family. The phone rang again. David answered, then covered the receiver. "Ms. Sterling, it's Maya Rodriguez. She says she'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss Dylan's future." Catherine smiled for the first time in weeks. "Tell her tomorrow at 2, my office." "She says she'll be there." What Catherine heard as compliance, Maya meant as confirmation. Tomorrow the real game would begin. But what neither woman knew was that Marcus Sterling had left behind more than just a son. He had left behind evidence of secrets that could destroy not just Catherine's empire, but everything she thought she knew about how her own family had built their fortune. What happened next would prove that Catherine Sterling had made the biggest mistake of her life, because Maya Rodriguez wasn't just any waitress. Maya arrived at Sterling Enterprises headquarters, wearing her best and only business suit, purchased 3 years ago at a Goodwill store in the Bronx for $25. The 60-story glass tower in Midtown Manhattan seemed designed to intimidate, its reflective surface showing her a distorted version of herself, smaller, less significant than the power contained within. But Maya Rodriguez had spent 1,247 days preparing for this moment. She knew exactly how significant she was. The elevator ride to the 58th floor felt like ascending to Mount Olympus. Other passengers, men in $1,000 suits, women carrying briefcases worth more than Maya's monthly rent, gave her the kind of polite, dismissive glances reserved for service staff. If they only knew. Catherine's corner office was a calculated display of power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, while original oil paintings and antique furniture spoke of old money and older privilege. Catherine sat behind a desk the size of Maya's kitchen table, positioned strategically so visitors had to look up at her. "Sit down," Catherine said, gesturing to a chair positioned several inches lower than her own. Maya remained standing. "I'd rather stand, thank you." Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. In 30 years of business, few people had ever refused her subtle power plays. "As you wish. We need to talk about Dylan." Maya nodded, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. She had practiced this conversation in her bathroom mirror, in the diner during slow periods, while Dylan slept. Every possible scenario, every potential argument, every weapon Catherine might deploy. Catherine opened a leather folder on her desk. "I've had you investigated, Miss Rodriguez. 2 jobs, no savings account with more than $347, living in conditions wholly unsuitable for raising a sterling heir. Dylan is well cared for and deeply loved," Maya replied, her voice calm but firm. Catherine's smile was sharp as winter wind. "I'm sure you do your best, but a sterling child deserves more than your best. He deserves the finest education money can buy, travel opportunities, cultural experiences you could never provide." "And what exactly are you suggesting?" Catherine slid a check across the polished mahogany surface. The number written in precise script, $200,000. "A start," Catherine said. "Dylan comes to live with me, receives the education and opportunities his father would have wanted. You can visit him on weekends, of course. Supervised visits initially, until we establish a routine." Maya stared at the check as if it were a coiled snake. In her peripheral vision, she could see Catherine watching her reaction, measuring her resolve, calculating the exact amount of pressure needed to break her. "Are you trying to buy my son?" Maya asked quietly. "He's not your son," Catherine said, her mask of civility beginning to slip. "He's my grandson, blood of my blood. And, frankly, a 26-year-old waitress with no formal education can't offer him what the Sterling family can provide." Maya laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Family? May I call you Catherine? You want to talk about family? Dylan calls me Mama. I wake up with him when he has nightmares about the father he barely remembers. I teach him to read at our kitchen table. I sing him to sleep with lullabies my grandmother taught me. That's family." Catherine stood, her 5'8" frame towering over Maya's 5'4". Noble sentiments, but reality is harsh. You work like a dog to pay rent that consumes half your income. Dylan deserves private schools, summers in Europe, opportunities you can never provide. And he deserves unconditional love, Maya replied steadily. "Something you clearly didn't give your own son." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine felt as if she had been physically struck. "How dare you?" Catherine whispered. "Marcus told me about you," Maya continued, her voice dropping but gaining intensity. "About the birthdays where you sent expensive gifts through assistants. About the football games you never attended because of board meetings. About the Christmas mornings where he opened presents alone, while you took conference calls." Catherine's hands clenched into fists. "You don't know anything about my relationship with Marcus." "I know enough," Maya said simply. "I know he spent his last year trying to find the courage to tell you about Dylan. I know he was terrified you'd try to take his son away from the only stable family he'd ever known. And I know exactly why he never told you Dylan existed." Maya picked up the check and, maintaining eye contact with Catherine, tore it precisely in half. The pieces fluttered to the expensive carpet like dying leaves. "Dylan isn't for sale," Maya said. "Not for $200,000, not for $2 million, not for all the money in your empire." Catherine's voice took on a dangerous edge. "Then we'll do this the hard way. I have resources you can't even imagine, Miss Rodriguez. Lawyers who've never lost a custody case, investigators who can find dirt on a saint, connections at every level of government." Maya smiled for the first time since entering the office. Something in that smile made Catherine hesitate. "Catherine," Maya said softly, "you're assuming I'm just a poor waitress you can intimidate. But there are things about me, about Dylan, about Marcus that you haven't discovered yet. And when you do—" She paused, her eyes flashing with a determination that surprised the billionaire. "Well, let's just say your investigators aren't as good as you think they are." Maya headed for the door, pausing only to look back over her shoulder. "And Catherine, the next time you want to discuss Dylan, it will be on my terms, not yours." After Maya left, Catherine stood alone in her office, staring at the torn pieces of the check scattered across her carpet. For the first time in decades, someone had walked away from a negotiation with her holding all the cards. What Catherine couldn't understand was why a simple waitress displayed such unshakable confidence. It was as if Maya knew something, some secret that rendered all of Catherine's threats and power irrelevant. Little did Catherine know that Maya's rejection of her offer was just the opening move in a game Maya had been planning since the day Marcus died. 3 days after the confrontation in her office, Catherine received a phone call that left her stunned. Her lead attorney, Richard Thornton of the prestigious firm Thornton & Associates, sounded nervous, something extremely rare in their 20-year partnership. "Catherine, I need to tell you something about any potential custody proceedings," Richard said, his voice tense over the secure line. "I got a call today about Miss Rodriguez's legal representation." Catherine was reviewing quarterly reports in her home office, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond her windows. "Let me guess, some overworked public defender?" "Actually," Richard paused, "it's Morrison, Caldwell & Pierce." Catherine nearly dropped her coffee. Morrison, Caldwell & Pierce was one of the 3 most powerful law firms in the country, specializing in civil rights cases and corporate accountability. They had a reputation for taking on impossible cases and winning them through sheer legal brilliance and unlimited resources. "That's impossible," Catherine said, setting down her cup with a trembling hand. "How does a waitress afford Morrison, Caldwell & Pierce?" "They're representing her pro bono, Catherine. And there's more. They've already filed a preemptive motion claiming that any attempt to forcibly remove Dylan would constitute legal kidnapping based on socio-economic discrimination. Catherine hung up hard enough to crack the phone's screen. Maya Rodriguez had just played her first card, and it was a much more powerful card than Catherine had imagined possible. Meanwhile, in Maya's modest one-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. The living room, which doubled as Dylan's playroom and Maya's study area, was crowded with people Catherine would never have expected to find there. Dr. Helen Rodriguez sat in Maya's only comfortable chair, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that spoke of decades spent in university lecture halls. At 67, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent 30 years teaching corporate law at the University of Chicago. "Maya, child," Helen said, her voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had learned English as a second language. "When you called me and said the time had finally come, I cancelled everything. We've been waiting for this moment for 3 years." Beside the window, Amanda Torres typed rapidly on her laptop, her investigative journalist credentials displayed in the careful way she observed everything while seeming to focus on her work. Her Pulitzer Prize for exposing corporate corruption sat in her Manhattan apartment, but her real credential was the network of sources she had built over 15 years of following money trails that powerful people preferred to keep hidden. "Dr. Rodriguez," said Dr. Michael Chen, a constitutional law professor at Columbia, "are you certain Maya is ready for this? Once we begin, there's no turning back. Catherine Sterling has immense resources and won't hesitate to use all of them." Maya looked up from where she sat on the floor with Dylan, helping him build a tower with wooden blocks. The domestic scene, a young mother in her waitress uniform playing with her son, belied the gravity of the conversation around them. "Professor Chen," Maya replied, her voice calm but determined, "I've been preparing for this moment for 3 years. Every night class I've taken, every law book I've read, every contact I've cultivated, it's all been to protect Dylan and honor Marcus's memory." Amanda looked up from her laptop. "The evidence you've gathered is impressive, Maya. 3 years of meticulous documentation of Sterling Enterprises' questionable business practices, shell companies in the Cayman Islands, suspicious payments to city council members, systematic violations of labor law at their manufacturing plants." Dr. Helen Rodriguez walked to the window, looking out at the view of the George Washington Bridge in the distance. "Catherine thinks her wealth makes her untouchable. She has no idea that my niece has spent the last 3 years studying her every move, every dirty deal, every attempt to avoid corporate responsibility." Maya's phone rang. The caller ID showed C. Sterling. Maya put the phone on speaker, allowing everyone in the room to hear Catherine's voice, tight with barely controlled fury. "What game are you playing?" Catherine demanded. "Morrison, Caldwell, and Pierce? How does a waitress get representation from attorneys who charge $800 an hour?" "Good evening, Catherine," Maya replied, her voice serene as a Sunday morning. "I imagine you've had an interesting conversation with your lawyer. I don't care what tricks you're using. Dylan is my grandson, and I have unlimited resources to get what I want." "Unlimited resources?" Maya smiled, looking at her allies gathered in her modest living room. "Catherine, you're assuming that money is the only kind of power there is, but what if I told you there's something much more powerful? And what would that be?" "The truth." Catherine laughed dismissively. "Truth doesn't pay for 800 an hour attorneys, Miss Rodriguez." "You're right," Maya agreed. "But the truth about your illegal business dealings, about how Sterling Enterprises has built its empire through fraudulent contracts and systematic bribery, that truth is worth much more than money to certain people." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "You're bluffing," Catherine finally said, but her voice had lost its previous confidence. "Amanda Torres from the Washington Tribune would like to speak with you," Maya said, handing the phone to the reporter. "Good evening, Miss Sterling," Amanda said, her voice professionally neutral. "I'm finishing up an investigative series on questionable corporate practices in the construction industry. I'd like to give you the opportunity to comment on the allegations we've documented regarding Sterling Enterprises' contracts with the city." Catherine hung up immediately. Dr. Helen smiled, proud of her niece. "Maya, you've learned well. Never attack head-on when you can outflank." Dylan looked up from his blocks. "Mama Maya, why is everyone here?" Maya picked up her son, his small arms wrapping around her neck with complete trust. "Because sometimes, baby, when you love someone, you have to be willing to fight for them. And we're going to make sure you always know how much you're loved. What Catherine Sterling was about to discover was that underestimating Maya Rodriguez had been the most expensive mistake of her career. Because Maya wasn't just fighting for custody of Dylan. She was fighting to expose a system that believed money could buy anything, including the right to tear apart families. Maya had played her first card, and it was much more powerful than Catherine had ever imagined possible. What Catherine didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The phone in Catherine's penthouse rang at 6:47 a.m., jolting her from the first restful sleep she'd had in days. David Chen's voice was tight with an emotion she'd never heard from her unflappable assistant. Fear. "Miss Sterling, you need to see today's Tribune. Front page." Catherine's silk robe billowed behind her as she rushed to her computer. The headline filled her screen in bold black letters. "Sterling Enterprises under federal investigation. Leaked documents suggest decade of corporate fraud." Her hands shook as she scrolled through the article. Photographs of documents she was certain had been secured. Details of conversations that should have been private. Her phone buzzed with incoming calls. Board members, investors, journalists. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Meanwhile, in Maya's apartment, the scene was one of quiet satisfaction. Dylan played with his toy trucks while the adults reviewed their strategy over coffee served in mismatched mugs. "Phase 1 complete," Amanda Torres said, closing her laptop. "The Tribune piece will be picked up nationally by noon. Sterling Enterprises stock is already down 12% in pre-market trading." Dr. Helen Rodriguez adjusted her reading glasses as she reviewed legal documents. "Maya, the custody filing has been submitted. We are claiming that any attempt to remove Dylan based solely on economic status constitutes discrimination under the Equal Protection Clause." Professor Chen nodded approvingly. "The precedents are solid. Johnson v. Caldwell Martinez v. State of Texas. Courts have consistently ruled that wealth alone cannot determine parental fitness." Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, helping Dylan arrange his trucks in precise lines, a habit he'd inherited from his father. How long before Catherine realizes this isn't just about custody? "Not long," Amanda replied. "She's smart enough to connect the dots. The question is whether she'll try to negotiate or go nuclear." Dr. Helen's phone buzzed. She read the message and smiled grimly. "Apparently, she's chosen nuclear." Richard Thornton just filed a motion requesting an emergency custody hearing, claiming Dylan is in immediate danger due to his living conditions. Maya's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "Let me guess. They're arguing that a one-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights is unfit for a Sterling heir." "Exactly. They're also questioning your mental fitness, citing erratic behavior and association with radical elements." Professor Chen laughed bitterly. "By radical elements, they mean civil rights attorneys and investigative journalists. Classic intimidation tactics." Maya's phone rang. Catherine Sterling, calling from what sounded like a moving vehicle. "You've made a very big mistake," Catherine said without preamble. "That article about my company. You have no idea the forces you're playing with." "Good morning, Catherine," Maya replied, putting the phone on speaker. "I trust you've seen the news. Those documents are privileged corporate communications. Publishing them is industrial espionage." Amanda leaned toward the phone. "Actually, Ms. Sterling, they're evidence of criminal activity. Under whistleblower protection laws, their publication serves the public interest." "Who is this?" "Amanda Torres, Washington Tribune. We spoke yesterday." Catherine's voice turned venomous. "Miss Rodriguez, you're declaring war on people with resources you can't comprehend. I will use every legal weapon at my disposal to protect my family's legacy." "Your family's legacy?" Maya's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Catherine, do you know how Marcus spent his final year?" The line went quiet. "He was investigating Sterling Enterprises," Maya continued. "Your own son discovered the fraud, the bribery, the systematic exploitation of workers. Marcus spent months gathering evidence because he couldn't believe his own mother was capable of such corruption." "That's impossible." Marcus was planning to expose everything," Maya interrupted. "He came to me because he needed someone he could trust, someone outside the sphere of Sterling influence, someone who could protect Dylan if something happened to him." Dr. Helen spoke directly into the phone. "Mrs. Sterling, this is Dr. Helen Rodriguez, Professor Emeritus of Corporate Law at the University of Chicago. I've spent 30 years studying cases exactly like yours, wealthy families who believe their money places them above accountability. I don't know who you people think you are. We're Dylan's family, Maya said simply. His real family. The people who love him without conditions, who put his welfare above our own interests. Dylan looked up from his trucks. Mama Maya, who's on the phone? Just someone who's confused about what family means, baby. Catherine's voice cracked slightly. He's my grandson, my blood. Blood doesn't make family, Catherine. Love does. Sacrifice does. Being present for the difficult moments does. When did you last sacrifice anything for someone you claim to love? Professor Chen gestured to Maya, indicating it was time to end the call. Catherine, Maya said, you have 48 hours to withdraw your custody filing and issue a public apology for questioning my fitness as Dylan's mother. If you don't, tomorrow morning's Tribune will contain Phase 2 of our investigation. What's Phase 2? Maya looked at Amanda, who nodded grimly. The truth about how the Sterling family fortune was really built, and the truth about what happened to Marcus. Maya hung up, leaving Catherine alone with the implications of that threat. Dylan tugged at Maya's sleeve. Mama, are we in trouble? Maya gathered him into her arms, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the solid weight of his small body against hers. No, baby, we're not in trouble. We're fighting for what's right. What Catherine Sterling was about to discover was that Maya Rodriguez had spent 3 years not just studying law, but studying the Sterling family history. And what she had found would destroy more than just a corporate empire. It would destroy everything Catherine thought she knew about her own identity. What came next would shock Catherine to her core, because Maya had allies Catherine never saw coming. Catherine's emergency meeting with her legal team took place in the Sterling Enterprises boardroom, 47 floors above Manhattan's chaos. The mahogany table that had witnessed countless corporate conquests now felt like a war council, preparing for defeat. The Tribune article has been picked up by CNN, MSNBC, and the Wall Street Journal, reported Jennifer Walsh, Sterling's head of communications. Our stock is down 28%. 3 board members have called emergency meetings. Richard Thornton spread legal documents across the table like cards in a losing poker hand. Catherine, the custody situation has become untenable. Morrison, Caldwell, and Pierce have filed 17 separate motions, each one more devastating than the last. What kind of motions? Catherine asked, though she dreaded the answer. Discriminatory removal based on economic status, grandparental alienation, attempt to sever established family bonds. They're arguing that Dylan has been in Maya's care for 3 years, that she's the only mother figure he's known, and that removing him would constitute psychological abuse. David Chen looked up from his tablet. There's more, Mrs. Sterling. Maya Rodriguez isn't just taking night classes at Columbia. She graduated last month with a paralegal certificate, summa cum laude. Catherine's blood ran cold. Last month? The timing isn't coincidental, Richard said grimly. She's been preparing for this confrontation for years. Catherine's phone buzzed. Maya Rodriguez, calling at exactly 2 p.m., the time Maya had specified during their last conversation. Good afternoon, Catherine. Maya's voice was calm, professional. I trust you've had time to consider our conversation. Miss Rodriguez, I don't know what game you think you're playing. No game, Catherine, just consequences. You've spent your entire career believing that money can solve any problem, buy any outcome. Today you're learning that some things can't be purchased. Catherine put the phone on speaker, allowing her legal team to hear. What do you want? I want you to understand something fundamental about power, Catherine. You have financial power, money, investments, assets. But Dylan and I, we have something much more valuable. And what's that? We have the truth. Amanda Torres's voice came through the phone. Ms. Sterling, this is Amanda Torres again. I'd like to give you another opportunity to comment on tomorrow's story. What story? Richard Thornton interjected. The investigation into Sterling Enterprises government contracts. Specifically, the $3 billion infrastructure deal with New York City that your company secured through documented bribes to city council members. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Those allegations are completely unfounded, Catherine said, though her voice lacked conviction. Actually, they're supported by bank records, email communications, and recorded conversations. Would you like to hear a sample? A voice Catherine recognized as former Councilman Robert Hayes filled the boardroom. The sterling money came through exactly as promised. 200,000 to my campaign fund, another 100,000 to my wife's consulting company. Catherine Sterling delivers on her promises. Catherine felt the world tilt. That conversation had taken place in Hayes's private office 2 years ago. There was no way anyone could have recorded it. "How did you get that?" she whispered. Maya's voice returned. "Catherine, you're still thinking like someone who believes she's untouchable. But what if I told you that for the past 3 years, while you thought you were investigating me, I've been investigating you?" "Doctor." Helen Rodriguez's voice joined the call. "Miss Sterling, this is Dr. Helen Rodriguez. I've been studying corporate corruption for 3 decades. Maya is my niece, and I taught her something very important. Knowledge is the only weapon that can't be stolen or bought." "Your niece?" Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "Maya's mother was my sister." "Doctor," Helen continued. "She died when Maya was 16, leaving her with nothing but a brilliant mind and an absolute commitment to justice. I've spent 20 years preparing Maya for a battle exactly like this one." Catherine looked around the boardroom at her high-priced legal team, her communications experts, her decades of accumulated power, and realized that none of it mattered. Maya Rodriguez had spent 3 years building a different kind of arsenal. "Professor Chen here," another voice joined the call. "Constitutional Law, Columbia University. I've been working with Maya on the legal framework for exposing systematic corporate corruption. What we've built isn't just a custody case, Ms. Sterling. It's a federal investigation." Catherine's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "Federal investigation?" "The documents we've gathered, bribes, money laundering, tax evasion, violation of labor laws, they've been shared with the appropriate authorities," Maya said. "The FBI Financial Crimes Unit has been very interested in Sterling Enterprises' creative accounting practices." Richard Thornton frantically scribbled notes, his usually composed demeanor cracking. "Catherine, we need to discuss plea negotiations immediately." "There won't be any negotiations," Maya's voice was firm. "Catherine, you had a choice. You could have accepted that Dylan is loved and cared for. You could have asked to be part of his life in a meaningful way. Instead, you tried to buy him like he was another corporate acquisition." Catherine's voice broke. "He's my only connection to Marcus, my only family." "No, Catherine, Dylan isn't your connection to Marcus. Your guilt is. Your regret for the relationship you never built with your son is driving this obsession with his child." Dr. Helen's voice was gentler now. "Ms. Sterling, I've seen this pattern in dozens of families. Wealthy parents who realize too late that success isn't worth losing your children. But trying to steal someone else's family won't heal that wound." Catherine looked out the boardroom windows at the Manhattan skyline she had once dominated. "What do you want from me?" "We want you to leave us alone," Maya said simply. "We want you to stop trying to tear apart the only family Dylan has ever known. And we want you to face the consequences of the crimes you've committed." "And if I fight this? If I use every resource at my disposal?" Amanda Torres answered. "Then tomorrow's Tribune will publish the complete Sterling family financial history, including the truth about how your grandfather really acquired the land that became Sterling Enterprises Foundation." Catherine's blood turned to ice. The original Sterling land acquisition was the family's darkest secret, Native American territory stolen through forged documents and murdered tribal leaders in 1892. If that truth emerged— "You can't prove any of that," Catherine said, but her voice was hollow. "Actually, we can," Maya replied. "Marcus found the documents in your grandfather's safe. He spent months verifying their authenticity. He was planning to return the land to the Seneca Nation when he died." The room spun around Catherine. Marcus had discovered the family's original sin and planned to make it right. Her son had been prepared to sacrifice the Sterling Empire for justice. "That's impossible. Marcus never said a lot of things to you, Catherine, but he told me everything, including how he felt about the mother who chose board meetings over bedtime stories." Catherine closed her eyes, seeing Marcus as a little boy, waiting by the window for a mother who never came home in time for dinner. Seeing him graduate valedictorian from prep school while she attended an acquisition meeting in Tokyo. Seeing him try to share his dreams with a mother whose phone was always ringing with more important calls. "Catherine," Maya's voice was surprisingly gentle, "Dylan doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your guilt. He needs what every child needs: Unconditional love, consistent presence, someone who puts his needs before their own ambitions. I could change, Catherine whispered. I could be different with Dylan than I was with Marcus. Change starts with accepting responsibility, Dr. Helen said, for the choices you made with Marcus, for the crimes Sterling Enterprises has committed, for the damage you've caused in pursuit of wealth and power. Catherine looked at her legal team, her communications experts, her accumulated arsenal of corporate weapons, all of it useless against a young woman who had chosen truth over money, justice over power. What happens now? Catherine asked. Now you make a choice, Maya said. You can withdraw your custody filing, issue a public apology, and begin the process of making amends for Sterling Enterprises' crimes. Or you can fight us, and we'll release everything. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence that shows how the Sterling fortune was really built. Catherine's phone showed 17 missed calls from board members, investors, journalists. Her empire was already crumbling, and this was just the beginning. I need time to consider, Catherine said. You have until midnight, Maya replied. After that, the choice will be made for you. The line went dead, leaving Catherine alone with her legal team and the weight of 3 generations of Sterling family crimes. What Catherine was about to discover was that Maya Rodriguez hadn't just been studying law for 3 years. She had been studying the Sterling family history with the thoroughness of an archaeologist uncovering buried civilizations. And what Maya had found would prove that some secrets are too big to stay buried forever. That's when the real truth began to emerge, a truth that would prove Maya had been underestimated in the most dangerous way possible. At 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Maya's midnight deadline, Catherine Sterling sat alone in her penthouse study, surrounded by the wreckage of her empire. News vans lined the street 40 stories below. Her phone had been ringing constantly with calls from reporters, board members, and federal investigators. She dialed Maya's number with trembling fingers. I was wondering if you'd call, Maya said without preamble. I need to understand something, Catherine said, her voice hoarse from hours of crisis meetings. How long have you been planning this? Since the day I buried Marcus, Maya replied. Would you like to know the real story, Catherine? The one your investigators never found? Catherine closed her eyes. Tell me. Maya's voice took on the cadence of someone who had rehearsed these words 1,000 times. I met Marcus at Columbia University. I was taking night classes while working as a waitress to pay tuition. He was auditing business ethics courses, trying to understand how to run a company without destroying people's lives. Marcus was auditing ethics courses. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 8 months, he sat in the back row taking notes like his life depended on it. He told me he was trying to figure out how to clean up something poisonous his family had built. Catherine felt tears she hadn't shed since Marcus's funeral. Her son had been trying to fix the Sterling legacy, while she continued to corrupt it. Marcus discovered what your grandfather did to the Seneca Nation, Maya continued. The forged land deeds, the murdered tribal leaders, the systematic theft of indigenous territory. He found the original documents in your grandfather's safe. How did he access that safe? I'm the only one who knows the combination. Maya's laugh was sad. Catherine, the combination is your birthday. Marcus figured it out when he was 12 years old. He'd been reading those documents for 16 years. The revelation hit Catherine like a physical blow. Marcus had known about the family's original crimes since childhood, had carried that knowledge through prep school, college, business school, his entire relationship with her. Marcus planned to return the stolen land to the Seneca Nation, Maya said. All 47,000 acres. He was going to dismantle Sterling Enterprises and rebuild it as an ethical company. He asked me to help him research the legal framework, but he died before he could tell you, because he was terrified of your reaction. He thought you'd disown him rather than give up the empire your family built on murder and theft. Catherine thought of her last conversation with Marcus, 3 days before the accident. He had seemed nervous, had asked to schedule a meeting to discuss the family's future. She had postponed it for a board meeting in Chicago. The car accident, Catherine whispered. It wasn't an accident, was it? The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. Marcus had been receiving death threats, Maya finally said. Someone found out about his plans to expose the Sterling family history. The police investigation was cursory. Wealthy family, tragic accident, case closed. Who threatened him? People who had a vested interest in keeping Sterling Enterprises exactly as it was. Board members whose own fortunes were tied to the company's success. City officials who had been taking Sterling bribes for decades. Construction companies that depended on Sterling's corrupt contracts. Catherine's mind raced through the possibilities. Robert Hayes, the city councilman who had taken Sterling bribes. Thomas Morrison, Sterling's longtime board member, whose construction company had received hundreds of millions in no-bid contracts. James Patterson, the police commissioner, whose department had received massive Sterling donations. You've known for 3 years that Marcus was murdered. I've suspected for 3 years. I've been gathering evidence for 3 years. And Catherine, I've finally found enough proof to bring down everyone involved. Catherine stood and walked to her window, looking down at the street where her son had grown up believing his own mother cared more about money than his life. Why didn't Marcus just tell me? Catherine asked. Why didn't he trust me with the truth? Because you taught him not to trust you, Maya said gently. Every time you chose a business meeting over his school play, every time you sent an assistant instead of coming yourself, every time you measured your love in dollars instead of presents, you taught him that your empire mattered more than he did. Catherine pressed her forehead against the cold window glass. I was building that empire for him, for his future. No, Catherine, you were building it for yourself, for your ego, your sense of power, your need to be more successful than your father and grandfather. Marcus was just the excuse you used to justify the damage you caused. The truth of Maya's words cut deeper than any hostile takeover, any corporate betrayal Catherine had ever experienced. Marcus wanted to break the cycle, Maya continued. He wanted to prove that the Sterling name could stand for justice instead of exploitation. When he died, I promised him I would finish what he started. By taking Dylan away from me. By protecting Dylan from becoming another generation of Sterlings who believe money justifies any crime. By making sure he grows up knowing that his father was a good man who died trying to do the right thing. Catherine looked at her reflection in the window, a 55-year-old woman who had accumulated billions of dollars and lost the only thing that mattered. What do you want from me, Maya? I want you to do what Marcus never got the chance to do. I want you to tell the truth, all of it. The land theft, the bribes, the murders, the systematic corruption. I want you to make amends. That will destroy everything I've built. Everything you've built was built on lies, Catherine. It deserves to be destroyed. Catherine closed her eyes, seeing Marcus as a child, eager to please a mother who was always too busy to notice. Seeing him as a teenager, trying to share his dreams with someone whose attention was always elsewhere. Seeing him as an adult, carrying the weight of family secrets she had been too selfish to acknowledge. If I do this, if I confess everything, what happens to Dylan? Dylan grows up knowing his grandmother chose to do the right thing. He grows up proud of the Sterling name because his grandmother redeemed it. And you? What happens to you? Maya's voice was calm, resolved. I finished law school. I passed the bar exam. I raised Dylan to be the man his father would have been proud of, and I make sure the world remembers Marcus Sterling as someone who died fighting for justice. Catherine looked around her study, at the portraits of Sterling patriarchs who had built their fortune on blood and theft. 3 generations of men who had chosen power over principle, wealth over humanity. I'll need time to prepare a statement, Catherine said. How much time? 48 hours, to speak with the board, to arrange for an orderly transfer of company assets to the victims of Sterling crimes. 48 hours, Maya agreed. And Catherine, Marcus would be proud of you. After hanging up, Catherine sat alone in her study, surrounded by the legacy she had spent her life building and was about to destroy. For the first time since Marcus's funeral, she felt something that had been absent for years. She felt hope. What Maya revealed next would destroy everything Catherine thought she knew about her own family. 46 hours after her conversation with Maya, Catherine Sterling stood before a wall of cameras in the Sterling Enterprises boardroom. Every major news network had sent reporters. The room hummed with the anticipation of watching a corporate empire commit suicide. Catherine looked directly into the cameras, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. My name is Catherine Sterling, and for 30 years I have been the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. Today I am here to confess to crimes that my family has committed for over a century. The room erupted in camera flashes and shouted questions. Catherine raised her hand for silence. In 1892, my great-grandfather, Charles Sterling, orchestrated the murder of 17 Seneca tribal leaders and forged land deeds to steal 47,000 acres of Native American territory. This land became the foundation of Sterling Enterprises. Reporters frantically scribbled notes as Catherine continued. For the past 30 years under my leadership, Sterling Enterprises has engaged in systematic bribery of city officials, tax evasion, money laundering, and violation of federal labor laws. The evidence of these crimes will be turned over to federal prosecutors. Catherine paused, looking directly into the primary camera. But there is one more truth I must share. 3 years ago, my son Marcus Sterling was murdered because he discovered these family secrets and planned to expose them. The room fell silent, except for the clicking of cameras. Marcus was killed by people who had vested interests in maintaining Sterling Enterprises' corrupt practices. People I trusted, people I considered friends, people who believed that murder was acceptable to protect their financial interests. Catherine opened a folder and began reading names. Robert Hayes, former city councilman, who received over $500,000 in Sterling bribes. Thomas Morrison, Sterling board member, whose construction company received fraudulent no-bid contracts worth $200 million. James Patterson, former police commissioner, who ensured the investigation into Marcus's death was terminated prematurely. Each name hit the room like a gunshot. These were powerful men, respected leaders, pillars of the community being exposed as criminals and conspirators. The evidence against these individuals, and others, is being turned over to federal prosecutors today. Sterling Enterprises will be dissolved, and all assets will be used to compensate the victims of our crimes. Catherine closed the folder and looked directly into the camera again. I am making this confession because my son died believing I would choose money over justice. I cannot bring Marcus back, but I can honor his memory by doing what he planned to do, telling the truth. After the press conference, Catherine sat alone in her empty office, while FBI agents catalogued evidence. Her phone rang constantly with calls from journalists, lawyers, and former associates. She ignored them all. At 6 p.m., Maya Rodriguez appeared in her doorway holding Dylan's hand. I saw the press conference, Maya said, settling into the chair across from Catherine's desk. Dylan climbed onto Maya's lap, looking around the opulent office with wide eyes. Is Mama Maya in trouble? Dylan asked, pointing at Catherine. No, baby, Maya said gently. The lady isn't in trouble anymore. She told the truth, and that's always the right thing to do. Catherine looked at her grandson for the first time without trying to possess him. His green eyes, Marcus's eyes, held curiosity but no fear. Dylan, Catherine said softly, my name is Catherine. I was your daddy's mommy. Dylan tilted his head, considering this information. Daddy's mommy? Where were you when Daddy was sad? The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. I was working, baby. I was working when I should have been with your daddy. That's sad, Dylan said with the simple honesty of childhood. Daddy needed his mommy. Catherine felt tears she had suppressed for decades. Yes, he did, and his mommy failed him. Maya looked around the office at the expensive art and antique furniture that represented generations of stolen wealth. What happens now, Catherine? Now I go to prison. The federal prosecutors have enough evidence to charge me with conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and accessory to murder. I'll probably die behind bars. Are you afraid? Catherine considered the question. No, for the first time in 30 years I'm not afraid, I'm free. Dylan squirmed in Maya's lap. Mama Maya, can we go home now? I want to play with my trucks. Of course, baby. Maya stood, then paused at the door. Catherine, there's something else Marcus wanted you to know. What's that? He loved you. Despite everything. Despite the missed birthdays and ignored phone calls. Despite choosing your empire over your son. He loved you. He just didn't know how to reach you. Catherine's composure finally broke. 3 years of grief, guilt, and denial poured out in sobs that echoed through the empty office. He wanted to tell you about Dylan, Maya continued. He wanted you to be a grandmother. But he was afraid you'd try to turn Dylan into another Marcus, another heir to an empire built on suffering. I would have, Catherine admitted through her tears. I would have ruined Dylan the same way I ruined Marcus. But now you won't get the chance, and maybe that's the greatest gift you can give your grandson, the chance to grow up free from the sterling legacy of corruption. Maya took Dylan's hand and walked toward the door. "Maya," Catherine called out, will you tell Dylan about his father? The real Marcus, not the one I tried to force him to become." "Every day," Maya promised. "I'll tell him about the man who died trying to do the right thing, the man who chose justice over wealth, the man who wanted to break the cycle of sterling corruption. And will you tell him about me? Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just his grandmother who loved him but didn't know how to show it." Maya paused in the doorway. "I'll tell him about the woman who chose truth over power, the woman who honored her son's memory by confessing her crimes, the woman who finally did the right thing." After they left, Catherine sat alone in her office as FBI agents continued their work around her. The Sterling Empire was collapsing. Her freedom was ending. Her reputation was destroyed. But for the first time since Marcus's death, Catherine Sterling felt something she had forgotten existed: peace. What Catherine was about to discover would shatter her world forever. The battle for Dylan wasn't just about custody. It was about a stolen inheritance, a murdered son, and a truth so devastating that it would bring down an entire empire built on lies. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan had never seen a media circus like the one that surrounded Catherine Sterling's arraignment. News vans lined the street for 6 blocks. Protesters carried signs demanding justice for the Seneca Nation. FBI agents in bulletproof vests escorted Catherine through crowds of reporters shouting questions. Inside the courthouse, Maya Rodriguez sat in the gallery with Dylan, Dr. Helen Rodriguez, and Amanda Torres. They watched as Catherine Sterling, once one of the most powerful women in America, stood before Judge Patricia Williams in an orange jumpsuit, her hands shackled behind her back. "Ms. Sterling," Judge Williams said, reviewing the federal charges, "you are charged with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor," Catherine said without hesitation. "To all charges." The courtroom erupted. Even though Catherine's confession had been broadcast nationwide, hearing her plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. "Your Honor," Catherine continued, "I would like to make a statement." Judge Williams nodded. "You may proceed." Catherine turned to face the gallery, her eyes finding Maya and Dylan immediately. 3 years ago, my son Marcus Sterling was murdered because he planned to expose crimes my family has committed for over a century. Marcus died because he chose justice over wealth, truth over power. He died because I created a system where murder was preferable to accountability. Catherine's voice grew stronger as she continued. Marcus left behind a son, Dylan, who has been raised with love and dignity by Maya Rodriguez. Maya is everything I failed to be as a mother: present, caring, selfless. Dylan has a family that loves him unconditionally, and I will not destroy that family to satisfy my own guilt and regret. Dylan tugged at Maya's sleeve. "Mama Maya, why is Daddy's mommy crying?" "Because she's sorry, baby," Maya whispered. "She's sorry for the mistakes she made." Catherine looked directly at Dylan. "Dylan, my grandson, I want you to grow up knowing that your father was a hero. He died trying to make the world more just. And I want you to know that sometimes the most loving thing a grandmother can do is stay away, so you can be raised by people who know how to love without conditions." Judge Williams spoke. "Ms. Sterling, given the severity of these charges and your admission of guilt, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Additionally, all Sterling family assets will be transferred to a victim compensation fund administered by the federal court." As Catherine was led away in handcuffs, she looked back one final time at Dylan. The little boy waved at her with the innocent friendliness of childhood, not understanding that his grandmother was disappearing from his life forever. Outside the courthouse, Maya held Dylan's hand as they navigated through crowds of reporters. "Ms. Rodriguez," called a CNN reporter, "what's your reaction to Catherine Sterling's sentence?" Maya paused, considering her words carefully. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. Catherine Sterling finally took responsibility for her crimes, and that's what her son Marcus would have wanted. What's next for you and Dylan?" Maya looked down at her grandson, who was fascinated by all the cameras and reporters. "We're going home. We're going to have dinner at our kitchen table. I'm going to help Dylan with his reading, and I'm going to tell him a story about his father before bedtime. We're going to live a normal, loving life. Ms. "Rodriguez," called a reporter from the Washington Tribune. "Sources say you've been accepted to law school. Is that true?" Maya smiled. "Columbia Law School, class of 2027. Dylan and I are going to prove that your circumstances don't determine your destiny. Your choices do." Meanwhile, in a federal holding cell, Catherine Sterling sat alone on a narrow cot, staring at a photograph she had been allowed to keep. It showed Marcus at age 5, grinning toothlessly at the camera, his green eyes bright with the innocent joy of childhood. For 30 years, Catherine had measured success in dollars, market share, quarterly profits. Now facing the rest of her life in prison, she finally understood what success really meant. It meant Maya Rodriguez working 2 jobs while taking night classes to build a better life for Dylan. It meant Dr. Helen Rodriguez spending her retirement years teaching her niece to fight systematic corruption. It meant Amanda Torres choosing truth over access, justice over exclusives. It meant choosing love over money, every single time. Catherine folded the photograph carefully and placed it under her pillow. Tomorrow she would begin serving a sentence that would likely end with her death in prison. But tonight, for the first time in decades, she would sleep without the weight of lies pressing down on her chest. The Sterling empire was gone. The family fortune was being redistributed to the victims of Sterling crimes. The corrupt officials who had conspired with her were facing their own federal charges. But Dylan Rodriguez, no longer Dylan Sterling, was going home to a 1-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights, where he was loved unconditionally by a woman who had chosen his welfare over personal gain, truth over profit, justice over revenge. And that, Catherine finally understood, was what victory actually looked like. The consequences were just beginning, and what happened next would prove that justice has no limits when it comes to protecting family. 2 years later, the visiting room at Federal Correctional Institution Danbury looked nothing like the opulent spaces Catherine Sterling had once commanded. Grey concrete walls, plastic chairs, and fluorescent lighting created an atmosphere of institutional bleakness that matched the orange jumpsuit she now wore daily. Catherine had aged dramatically during her incarceration. Her once perfect blonde hair had grown out grey and was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without access to her previous beauty regimen, she looked every one of her 57 years. But there was something different in her eyes, a peace that had been absent during her years of power. She looked up as Maya Rodriguez entered the visiting room, dressed in a navy blue business suit that spoke of professional success. Behind Maya walked a 6-year-old Dylan, now taller and more confident, wearing a small Columbia University t-shirt. "Maya," Catherine said, standing as they approached. "Dylan, thank you for coming." Dylan looked around the sterile visiting room with curiosity rather than fear. "Mama Maya, is this where Daddy's mommy lives now?" "Yes, baby," Maya said gently. "This is where she's learning to be a better person." Catherine knelt to Dylan's eye level. "Hello, Dylan, you've grown so much." "Hi," Dylan said with the straightforward honesty of childhood. "Mama Maya says you're sorry for the bad things you did." "I am sorry," Catherine said. "Very sorry. And I'm proud of you for being such a good boy." "I can read chapter books now," Dylan announced proudly. "And Mama Maya is teaching me Spanish, and I know about Daddy. Mama Maya tells me stories about how Daddy wanted to help people." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Your daddy was a very good man, Dylan. Much better than his mommy." Maya sat down across from Catherine, opening a folder she had brought. "I have news, Catherine. The Seneca Nation has officially reclaimed their ancestral lands. The ceremony is next month." "That's wonderful," Catherine said, meaning it. "Marcus would be so happy." "There's more. The Victim Compensation Fund has distributed over $2.8 billion to families affected by Sterling Enterprises crimes. Hundreds of workers have received medical treatment for injuries caused by unsafe working conditions. Dozens of small businesses destroyed by Sterling's fraudulent practices have been compensated." Catherine nodded, tears flowing freely now. "Good. It's what should have happened decades ago." Dylan tugged at Maya's sleeve. "Mama Maya, can I tell her about school?" "Of course, baby." Dylan turned to Catherine with excitement. "I go to the same school Daddy went to when he was little, Phillips Academy, and I'm in the advanced reading program, and I play violin like Daddy did." Catherine looked at Maya in surprise. "Phillips Academy? That's one of the most expensive prep schools in the country. How?" Maya smiled. "The courts determined that Dylan, as Marcus's son, was entitled to inherit Marcus's legitimate assets, the ones that weren't tied to Sterling's criminal enterprises. It's enough to provide for his education and secure his future. But you didn't have to. You could have kept that money for yourself. Catherine, I'm not you. I don't measure my worth by my bank account. Besides, I have something much more valuable than money. What's that? Maya looked at Dylan, who was now drawing pictures on a piece of paper he had found in his pocket. I have the love of a child who trusts me completely. I have the satisfaction of keeping a promise I made to his father. I have the knowledge that I'm raising a boy who will grow up believing in justice, not just profit. Catherine watched Dylan draw, seeing Marcus's concentration, Marcus's careful attention to detail. What's he drawing? Dylan held up his picture proudly. It's our family. That's me, and that's Mama Maya, and that's Daddy watching from heaven, and that's Aunt Helen, and that's you. Catherine stared at the stick figure labeled Daddy's Mommy, standing slightly apart from the other figures, but still included in the family group. You included me. Mama Maya says family is complicated, Dylan said matter-of-factly. She says you made big mistakes, but you're still part of our story. Catherine looked at Maya with something approaching awe. You taught him to forgive me? I taught him to understand that people can change, Maya corrected. I taught him that his father's mother made terrible choices, but chose to do the right thing in the end. I want Dylan to grow up believing in redemption, not just punishment. A guard announced that visiting time was ending. Maya stood, gathering her things. Maya, Catherine said urgently, there's something I need you to know. About Marcus's death, about who really ordered it. Maya paused. Catherine, the FBI investigation was wrong, Catherine interrupted. It wasn't just the city officials and board members. There was someone else, someone I trusted completely. Someone who had access to information only family members knew. Who? Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper. My brother, Marcus's uncle, David Sterling. Maya's blood ran cold. David Sterling was still alive, still wealthy, still moving in powerful circles despite the destruction of Sterling Enterprises. David knew about Marcus's plans to expose the family history. He's the one who organized the murder. He's the one who convinced me the investigation was closed. He's the one who made sure I never suspected family involvement. Why are you telling me this now? Catherine looked at Dylan, who was showing his drawing to a guard. Because David knows about Dylan. He knows about the inheritance. And he spent 2 years planning to claim what he believes is rightfully his. Maya felt the world tilt. Just when she thought the Sterling family's capacity for destruction had been exhausted, another threat emerged. What does he want? Everything, Catherine said grimly. The inheritance, custody of Dylan, and the power to reshape the Sterling legacy according to his vision. And Maya, David Sterling is much more dangerous than I ever was, because he's learned from my mistakes. The guard approached. Time's up, Sterling. As Catherine was led away, she called back to Maya. Be careful. David doesn't make the same mistake twice, and he won't underestimate you the way I did. Maya left the prison with Dylan's hand in hers, but her mind was racing. The battle for Dylan's safety wasn't over. It was just beginning. What happened next would surprise everyone watching, because Catherine Sterling was about to lose everything she had built on lies. 6 months after Catherine's warning about David Sterling, Maya Rodriguez stood in her cap and gown at Columbia Law School's graduation ceremony. In the audience, Dylan sat between Dr. Helen Rodriguez and Amanda Torres, his small hands clapping enthusiastically as Maya's name was called. Maya Elena Rodriguez, Juris Doctor, magna cum laude. As Maya crossed the stage to receive her diploma, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a grief-stricken waitress, holding a motherless child at a cemetery, to an attorney with the knowledge and credentials to protect Dylan from any threat. The celebration was short-lived. As they left the graduation ceremony, Maya's phone buzzed with a call from federal prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh. Maya, we need to talk immediately. David Sterling has filed a lawsuit claiming Dylan's inheritance was obtained through fraud. He's arguing that the courts didn't have jurisdiction to award assets to the child of an unmarried couple. Maya's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he's challenging Dylan's legitimacy as Marcus's heir. And Maya, he has some very expensive lawyers making very sophisticated arguments. That evening in Maya's apartment, now slightly larger but still modest, The core team assembled once again. Dr. Helen, Amanda Torres, Professor Chen and Maya sat around the kitchen table while Dylan played quietly in his room. David Sterling is claiming that without a marriage certificate between Marcus and Dylan's biological mother, Dylan has no legal right to Marcus's inheritance, Professor Chen explained. It's an antiquated argument, but it has some legal precedent. Amanda looked up from her laptop. I've been researching David Sterling for 6 months. This man makes Catherine look like an amateur. He's been involved in arms dealing, human trafficking, and political assassination. The FBI has been trying to build a case against him for 20 years. Dr. Helen adjusted her reading glasses. What does he want with Dylan? Control, Maya said quietly. If David can prove Dylan isn't legally entitled to Marcus's inheritance, he becomes the sole remaining Sterling heir. He gets everything: the legitimate assets, the political connections, the power to rebuild the Sterling empire. But Catherine confessed to the crimes. Sterling Enterprises was dissolved. The company was dissolved, Amanda corrected. But the Sterling family still has extensive assets hidden in offshore accounts, shell companies, and real estate holdings. David has spent 2 years consolidating control over everything Catherine couldn't confess to, either because she didn't know about it or because it was technically legal. Maya's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Rodriguez, a smooth male voice said, "This is David Sterling. I believe we should meet." Maya put the phone on speaker. "Mr. Sterling, I've been expecting your call." "Have you? How prescient." "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Rodriguez, one that I think you'll find quite reasonable." "I'm listening." "You return Dylan to his rightful family, meaning me, and I'll ensure you're compensated generously for your years of care. Shall we say $10 million? Maya looked around the table at her allies. "And if I refuse?" David's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Ms. Rodriguez, my dear sister-in-law was a blunt instrument. She used obvious corruption, traceable bribes, and transparent fraud. I'm much more sophisticated. I specialize in perfectly legal methods of destroying people." Maya looked around the table at her allies. Dr. Helen, Amanda, Professor Chen, each one understanding the gravity of this new threat. "Ms. Rodriguez, my sister-in-law Catherine was a blunt instrument. She used obvious corruption, traceable bribes, and transparent fraud. I'm much more sophisticated. I specialize in perfectly legal methods of destroying people." Maya looked around the table at her allies. Dr. Helen, Amanda, Professor Chen, each one understanding the gravity of this new threat. "What kind of legal methods?" Maya asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Immigration enforcement, for starters. Dr. Helen Rodriguez's citizenship status is questionable. A single phone call to ICE could result in her immediate deportation. Professor Chen's visa status could be revoked if questions arose about his political activities. And you, Ms. Rodriguez, well, single mothers from poor backgrounds face scrutiny from Child Protective Services all the time." Dr. Helen's face went pale. She had been a naturalized citizen for 40 years, but David Sterling clearly had access to information that could challenge even that. "You're threatening to destroy innocent people to get to Dylan," Maya said. "I'm offering to spare innocent people if you see reason. $10 million, Ms. Rodriguez. More money than your family has seen in 5 generations. All you have to do is admit that a waitress with a high school education isn't the appropriate guardian for a Sterling heir." Dylan appeared in the doorway of his room, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mama Maya, who's on the phone?" Maya quickly muted the call. "Just someone from work, baby. Go back to bed. I'll read you a story in a few minutes." As Dylan returned to his room, Maya unmuted the phone. "Mr. Sterling, Dylan isn't a Sterling heir. His name is Dylan Rodriguez. He's my son in every way that matters. Legally, that's not true, and I have enough influence in family court to ensure that fact becomes very relevant very quickly." Amanda Torres leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Sterling, this is Amanda Torres, Washington Tribune. I'd like to ask you about your business relationship with Senator Patricia Williams." The line went dead immediately. Professor Chen looked up from his laptop. "Senator Williams sits on the Judiciary Committee. If David Sterling has compromised her, then he can influence federal court appointments, judicial decisions, and law enforcement priorities," Dr. Helen finished grimly. Maya stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Manhattan. Somewhere in that glittering cityscape, David Sterling was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, a man who made Catherine look like an amateur was preparing to tear apart the family she had built with love and sacrifice. "What are our options?" Maya asked. Amanda closed her laptop with a decisive snap. "We expose him before he can move against us. I've been building a file on David Sterling for 6 months. Arms dealing, political corruption, human trafficking, crimes that make Catherine's fraud look like jaywalking. But he's been evading the FBI for 20 years, Professor Chen pointed out. What makes you think? Because he's never faced someone like Maya before," Dr. Helen interrupted, her voice strong despite the threat hanging over her. "David Sterling is used to intimidating people who have something to lose. Maya has already lost everything that mattered and built it back through her own strength." Maya turned from the window, her expression resolute. "Amanda, how long do you need to prepare your exposé?" 72 hours to verify sources and get legal clearance. Professor Chen, can you file an emergency motion to expedite the inheritance case? Already drafted. It'll be filed first thing tomorrow morning. Doctor, Helen, I need you to take Dylan to Chicago tonight. Stay with your colleagues at the university until this is over. Maya, I'm not leaving you to face this alone. You're not leaving me alone. You're protecting Dylan. And Dylan is all that matters. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. You have 48 hours to reconsider my offer. After that, Dylan will be removed from your care by court order. DS. Maya showed the message to the group. He's moving faster than we expected, Amanda said. Then we move faster than he expects, Maya replied. Amanda, forget the 72 hours. How quickly can you publish? Tomorrow morning, front page. But Maya, once we do this, there's no going back. David Sterling won't just disappear quietly like Catherine did. He'll fight back with everything he has. Maya looked toward Dylan's room, where her son slept peacefully, trusting that the adults in his life would protect him from forces he couldn't understand. Then we'd better make sure we win, Maya said. What David Sterling was about to discover was that Maya Rodriguez had learned more than just law during her 3 years of preparation. She had learned that the most dangerous opponents aren't the ones who have the most to gain, but the ones who have everything to lose. And Maya Rodriguez had everything to lose. What happened next would surprise everyone watching, because David Sterling was about to learn that some battles can't be won with money or threats. The Washington Tribune's headline dominated newsstands across the country. The Sterling Conspiracy, how Marcus Sterling's uncle ordered his murder and built an empire on blood money. By 6 a.m., David Sterling's photograph was on every major news network. By 8 a.m., FBI agents had surrounded his penthouse apartment. By 10:20 a.m., he was in federal custody facing charges of conspiracy to commit murder, arms trafficking, and racketeering. Maya watched the news coverage from Amanda Torres's apartment, Dylan safe in Chicago with Dr. Helen. Her phone had been ringing constantly since the story broke. Reporters, federal prosecutors, and lawyers all wanting statements. How do you feel? Amanda asked, pouring coffee for both of them. Exhausted, Maya admitted, and relieved, and terrified that this isn't over yet. Amanda's phone buzzed. It's Jennifer Walsh, the federal prosecutor. Maya took the call. Ms. Walsh. Maya, David Sterling wants to make a deal. He's offering to plead guilty to the murder charges in exchange for dropping his claim on Dylan's inheritance. What does that mean for Dylan? It means he's safe, legally, financially, and physically. David Sterling will spend the rest of his life in prison, and Dylan's inheritance is secure. Maya closed her eyes, feeling 3 years of tension finally leaving her body. What do I need to do? Nothing. Just live your life, raise your son, practice law, be happy. 2 weeks later, Maya stood in the kitchen of her new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood in Queens. Dylan ran through the rooms, excited to have his own bedroom for the first time in his life. Mama Maya, can we paint my room blue like Daddy's favorite color? Dylan called from upstairs. Of course, baby, Maya called back, smiling at the pure joy in his voice. The doorbell rang. Maya opened it to find a woman in her 70s, impeccably dressed, carrying a small wrapped gift. Ms. Rodriguez? My name is Eleanor Seneca. I'm a representative of the Seneca Nation. Maya invited her in and they sat in the living room while Dylan played upstairs. We wanted to thank you, Eleanor said simply, for helping Catherine Sterling do the right thing, for ensuring our ancestral lands were returned, for proving that justice is possible even when it seems impossible. She handed Maya the wrapped gift. Inside was a beautiful piece of traditional Seneca jewelry, a silver necklace with intricate beadwork. This belonged to my great-grandmother, who was killed in 1892 when Charles Sterling stole our land. I want Dylan to have it, so he understands that his father died fighting for justice, and that his sacrifice restored what was stolen. Maya's eyes filled with tears. Eleanor, this is beautiful, but I can't. Please. Marcus Sterling died trying to return what his family had stolen. Dylan should know that his father's dream came true. That evening, Maya and Dylan sat on their new front porch, watching the sunset over Queens. Dylan wore the Seneca necklace proudly, and Maya had just finished reading him a story about his father. Mama Maya, Dylan said thoughtfully, do you think Daddy knows we're safe now? Maya pulled him closer. I think your daddy has always known you were safe, baby, because he chose the right person to take care of you. Will I see Daddy's mommy again? Maya considered the question carefully. Maybe someday, when you're older. She's learning to be a better person, and if you want to visit her, we can talk about it then. Okay, Mama Maya? Yes, baby. I'm glad you're my mama. Maya held Dylan close, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling the solid weight of his small body against hers. 3 years ago, she had been a waitress with no family, no future, no prospects. Today, she was an attorney with a beautiful home, a son who loved her unconditionally, and the knowledge that she had kept a promise to a dead friend. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Helen. Just saw the news about David Sterling's plea agreement. Justice has been served, Mika. Marcus can rest in peace. As the stars appeared over Queens, Maya thought about Marcus Sterling, the young man who had chosen justice over wealth, truth over power, love over legacy. His son would grow up knowing that story. Dylan would grow up understanding that real strength comes from doing the right thing, even when it costs everything. Maya's other phone buzzed, her work phone. A potential client, a single mother facing eviction, needing legal help she couldn't afford. Maya would take the case pro bono, just as Maya herself had been helped by lawyers who believed in justice over profit. Come on, baby, Maya said, standing and taking Dylan's hand. Let's go inside. Tomorrow's a school day and Mama has some reading to do for work. Are you going to help more people like Daddy wanted to help people? Yes, Dylan, that's exactly what I'm going to do. As they walked into their house, their home, Maya realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the destruction of enemies, but the building of something beautiful from the ashes of what was broken. Dylan Rodriguez would grow up knowing that his father had been a hero. He would grow up believing in justice, not just profit. He would grow up understanding that family isn't defined by blood or money, but by love and sacrifice and choosing to do the right thing every single day. And someday, when Dylan was older, Maya would tell him the complete story, how a waitress with a high school education had brought down one of America's most powerful families using nothing but patience, preparation, and an unshakable belief that truth always wins in the end. Maya Rodriguez Escundo looked up from her desk at the Rodriguez & Associates law firm, a small practice specializing in family law and corporate accountability. Through her window, she could see Dylan, now 11 years old, walking home from school with his violin case. Her phone rang. Rodriguez & Associates, this is Maya. Maya, it's Jennifer Walsh. I wanted to let you know. Catherine Sterling died in prison this morning. Natural causes. She asked that this be delivered to you. The package arrived the next day. Inside was a letter and a small wooden box. Dear Maya, the letter read in Catherine's careful handwriting. I have spent 5 years in prison thinking about the choices I made and the son I lost. I want Dylan to know that his father was the best of the Sterling family and that his mother is the bravest person I ever met. In this box is Marcus's wedding ring, the one he bought for Dylan's mother but never had the chance to give her. Dylan should have it when you think he's ready. Thank you for teaching an old woman that it's never too late to choose love over money. Catherine. That evening, Maya told Dylan about his grandmother's death and showed him his father's ring. She wasn't a bad person, Mama Maya. No, baby. She was a person who made bad choices for a long time but chose to do the right thing in the end. Just like your daddy taught us. It's never too late to change. Dylan held the ring carefully, turning it over in his small hands. When I grow up, I want to be a lawyer like you, and help people like Daddy wanted to help people. Maya smiled, thinking of Marcus Sterling, who had died believing in justice. His son would carry that belief forward, and maybe, just maybe, the Sterling name would finally stand for something good. You can be anything you want to be, Dylan, as long as you remember what your daddy taught us. What's that? That love always wins. It just sometimes takes a little longer than we expect. Thank you to everyone who typed family and justice earlier. Your support means everything. If this story of love conquering greed inspired you, please subscribe and type inspired below. Until next time, remember, truth always wins, it just takes patience.